The Glycon hegemony moved through the cosmos not as conquerors, but as gardeners tending to a chaotic, overgrown wilderness. For millennia, they had pruned the unruly branches of lesser civilizations, grafting them into the grand, orderly design of the hegemony's truth. Their fleets, the gleaming sickles of this cosmic husbandry, had never met a weed they could not cull. They were an empire built on the serene, unshakable confidence of their own enlightenment. Their technology and philosophy so far advanced that the struggles of younger races were viewed with a sort of paternalistic pity. Resistance was not a threat. It was a symptom of ignorance, a fever to be broken by the cool, inevitable touch of Glyconian integration. Each new species was a fallen child to be lifted up, and the Glyconians were the only parents the galaxy would ever need. High Adjudicator Vrex, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the star charts on the bridge of the immutable logic, felt this truth in every fiber of his chitinous exoskeleton. He was a vessel of the hegemony's will, a perfect product of its eons of undisputed supremacy. His mind was a calm ocean, connected through the silent synaptic chorus to the sub-adjudicators commanding the 50 drone frigates that swam like silver darts around his carrier. He had brought 100 worlds to heal, never by razing their cities, but by showing them the flawless architecture of the Glyconian way. He had never witnessed a Glyconian vessel fall in combat, for their engagements were not combats at all. They were recalibrations. Their latest recalibration was to be a minor one. A scattered network of outposts belonging to a bipedal species called humans had been detected in the Veil Nebula, a tattered shroud of gas and stellar debris in a resource-poor sector the hegemony had long ignored. Their primitive radio signals, leaking into the void like the babbling of infants, spoke of a disorganized, tribal culture. They were lost, frightened children playing in the dark. It was time. The Grand Synod had decreed to bring them into the light. Vrex's Enlightenment Fleet, a standard deployment for such a task, slipped into the nebula's outer wisps, the oppressive silence of the void replacing the hum of warp space. Sub-adjudicator Lyra, her carapace a shade younger and less scarred than Vrex's, shimmered into existence on the holographic dais beside him. High Adjudicator, she reported, her thoughts echoing his own in the chorus. We are within range of their primary settlement. The colony is primitive, pre-gravitic. Shall I initiate the anthem of benevolence? Vrex made a minute gesture with a primary manipulator. Proceed. Sub-adjudicator, let them hear the voice of their salvation. The immutable logic broadcast its message, a symphony of harmonic frequencies and perfect translated grammar that had soothed the defiant hearts of 1,000 other species. It spoke of order, of purpose, of an end to struggle and a beginning of belonging. It was a declaration of their immutable truth and a gentle, non-negotiable demand for peaceful integration. Vrex and his fleet waited for the inevitable reply, the panicked transmissions, the fearful pleas, or the gloriously futile launch of chemical rockets that would be lovingly disabled. They received nothing. The seconds ticked into minutes, the minutes into hours. The human colony remained utterly silent. No transmissions, no ships, no change in their meager energy signatures. It was an anomaly Vrex had never encountered. Silence, in his experience, was the precursor to acceptance, the quiet awe before submission. But this was different. This was a hollow, deliberate void. Their communications technology may be too primitive to reply, Lyra offered, a flicker of uncertainty in her otherwise placid chorus presence. Vrex considered this. It was possible. Perhaps a visual demonstration is required, he mused. Move the fleet closer. Let them see the vessels that bring them their future. As the fleet advanced, a ripple went through the chorus. It was not a thought from a commander, but a pure data feed from the forward sensor arrays. Anomalous readings. High adjudicator, Lyra stated, her voice losing its serene edge. The nebula is changing. Vrex focused his attention on the main view screen. The thick clouds of turquoise and magenta gas, which had been placid moments before, were beginning to move. Not in the slow, graceful dance of stellar winds, but with a horrifying purpose. Vast tendrils of dust and hydrogen coalesced, swirling into eddies and vortexes that defied the fleet's gravitational models. Sensor screamed, reporting localized gravity wells that flickered into and out of existence. It is a natural phenomenon, Vrex declared, more to calm the nascent disquiet in the chorus than out of genuine belief. The nebula's unique properties were not fully cataloged, but it was not natural. From the heart of the largest vortex, a ship emerged. Vrex's ocular senses, capable of perceiving a dozen spectrums of light, struggled to process it. It was small, asymmetrical, and so heavily scarred it looked more like a salvaged piece of wreckage than a functional vessel. Patches of its hull were mismatched, and its visible weapon emplacements were, by Glyconian standards, archaic. It drifted toward them, a piece of cosmic flotsam against the tide of their perfect silver fleet. Vrex felt a wave of something akin to insult. This was their response. This derelict craft, they send a single, pathetic ship to greet a fleet of 51. He thought into the chorus, the feeling rippling through his commanders. Their ignorance is more profound than we calculated. He gave a clipped order. Target the vessel, a standard pacification ray. We will disable it, retrieve the crew, and begin their education. A drone frigate, the inevitable conclusion, moved forward. From its central spire, a beam of shimmering emerald light shot across the void. It was a non-lethal weapon, designed to overload a ship's power systems and render it inert. The beam struck the human vessel squarely. Instead of sparking and dying, the ship's hull began to glow with the same emerald light, absorbing the energy like a sponge, and the dim lights on its exterior brightened. Then, a message was broadcast, slicing through every Glyconian channel with flawless, unaccented syntax. We are the wardens of this veil. Your truth is not welcome here. Turn back. The sheer audacity of it stunned Vrex into a moment of inaction. The chorus was a maelstrom of confusion. Turn back. The Glycon hegemony did not turn back. The word was not in their tactical vocabulary. This was not defiance. This was madness. Vrex's patience, a vast and carefully cultivated resource, evaporated. Sub-adjudicator Lyra, he commanded, his voice cold and sharp. Instruct the inevitable conclusion to fire a plasma cannon, a warning shot across its bow. Let them understand the futility of their position. The frigate obeyed. A globe of incandescent blue plasma erupted from its forward cannon. The human ship did not move. It did not erect a shield. It did not attempt to evade. Instead, something impossible happened in the space between the two vessels. The void itself seemed to pinch inward. A perfect sphere of absolute blackness, no larger than the frigate's cannon barrel, materialized for a nanosecond. The plasma bolt, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, flew into this micro-singularity and vanished. The sphere of blackness was gone as if it had never been. A full second of stunned silence passed on the bridge of the immutable logic. Then, that same sphere of impossible blackness opened again, not in the empty space, but inside the command bridge of the inevitable conclusion. The The frigate's lights went out. Its energy signature vanished from the tactical display. The connection to its commander in the chorus was severed, not with a cry of pain or a burst of static, but with a sudden, total non-existence. The ship, moments ago a perfect instrument of Glyconian will, was now just a silent, drifting tomb. Horror, a raw and alien emotion Vrex had only read about in historical texts, washed over him. The chorus erupted in a cacophony of shock and disbelief. Before Vrex could process the loss, before he could formulate a new strategy, he saw the human ship begin to glow again, its hull shimmering with absorbed energy. All units, he roared, his voice and his chorus thought a single, desperate command. Fire at will, erase that vessel from existence. The fleet unleashed its fury. Plasma cannons, ion disruptors, kinetic rods, the full might of an Enlightenment fleet poured toward the lone human ship. It was a storm of energy that could crack a continent. And the same thing happened again, and again, and again. The Warden, as it had called itself, did not fight them. It wielded reality as a shield. Micro-singularities bloomed and vanished, swallowing entire volleys of torpedoes. Gravitational lenses formed from nothing, bent beams of pure energy back at the ships that fired them. A drone frigate, the flawless argument, was suddenly encased in a bubble of distorted space-time. Through the view screen, Vrex watched it age 1,000 years in a second, its hull corroding to dust, its crew turning to skeletons, before the bubble popped and left only debris. They were not fighting a ship. They were fighting the universe itself. And the universe had chosen a side. 10 ships, 10 perfect, gleaming instruments of the hegemony's will, with 1,000 Glyconian minds aboard them, were gone in less than a minute. They were not destroyed in explosions of fire and shrapnel. They were unwritten from the laws of physics. Their crews and their commanders erased so completely it was as if they had never been born. The chorus was a symphony of terror. For the first time in his life, High Adjudicator Vrex understood fear, and he knew, with a certainty that shattered the very foundations of his indoctrinated soul, that he had to give an order he never thought possible. Retreat! He broadcast to the shattered remnants of his fleet. All vessels, emergency warp, retreat. The Warden let them go. It made no move to pursue as the Glyconian ships, damaged and panicked, tore open reality and fled. As the immutable logic prepared for its own jump, one final message arrived. It was not in the Glyconian tongue. It was a simple, elegant string of prime numbers, a universal message of pure mathematics. It was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was a cold, clean, logical statement of fact from an intelligence so far beyond their own that it could use the language of creation as a weapon. Vrex finally understood. The hegemony had not stumbled upon a primitive tribe. They had knocked on the door of a god. And the unnerving silence from the Veil Nebula had not been the silence of fear. It was the silence of patience, the awful, ancient patience of a warden standing guard over something they could not possibly comprehend. The return journey was not a retreat. It was a flight. The very concept was so alien to the Glyconian psyche that the crews on the 40 surviving ships could not properly process it. In the chorus, where once there had been a seamless ocean of shared purpose, there were now jagged islands of isolated terror. The synaptic link that bound them together had become a conduit for shared trauma, echoing with the silent, final non-existence of the 10 erased commanders. On the bridge of the immutable logic, the serene hum of a perfectly functioning vessel was replaced by the discordant symphony of damage control alarms and the strained whir of overloaded systems. Vrex stood on his command dais, his multifaceted eyes no longer reflecting the cool certainty of star charts but the flickering red alerts of his own broken fleet. He had severed his direct link to the greater chorus, unable to bear the unfiltered panic that now defined it. He was an island himself, adrift in an ocean of his own making. Beside him, Sub-Adjudicator Lyra worked with a frantic, focused energy, her manipulators a blur across the holographic interfaces. She was attempting to collate the sensor data from the engagement to force the raw, screaming impossibility of what they had witnessed into the neat, logical boxes of a Glaconian battle report. The singularity events are inconsistent, she reported, her thoughts a tight, controlled beam directed only at him, a desperate attempt to maintain the semblance of protocol. They have no discernible energy signature prior to manifestation, no gravitational lensing. They simply are, and then are not. The temporal distortion that decayed the flawless argument left behind no residual tachyons. It is a violation of every known law of causality. Vrex looked at the replay on the main screen. He had watched it 100 times already. He saw the globe of blue plasma from his frigate, a statement of overwhelming power, vanish into a pinprick of nothing. He saw that nothingness reappear moments later inside the bridge of his own ship. It was not a weapon. A weapon is a tool that applies a principle of physics to cause harm. This was different. The Warden had not used physics as a tool. It had used physics as a medium, like a painter uses canvas, and it had painted his fleet out of existence. And the final transmission, he asked, his own voice sounding foreign to him, brittle. Lyra brought up the sequence of prime numbers. It scrolled across the screen, a clean, perfect, unending stream of logic. Our linguists and mathematicians are confounded. High Adjudicator, she admitted, the first crack appearing in her composure. It is not code. It is not a message in the conventional sense. It is a proof, a mathematical declaration of an axiom we do not possess. It is like a child showing a stone tool to a master architect, and the architect replying by silently constructing a cathedral out of thin air. Vrex deactivated the screen. He could not look at it anymore. The numbers were a deeper insult than any weapon. They were a statement of such profound intellectual superiority that it relegated the entirety of Glaconian achievement, their philosophy, their science, their truth, to the level of primitive superstition. They were gardeners who had just discovered that the weeds they had come to prune were, in fact, the silent, thinking roots of the entire forest. The rest of the journey passed in that haunted silence. As they finally broke from warp space into the Glycon home system, the contrast was a physical blow. Glycon Prime was a jewel, a world of perfect, crystalline cities and geometrically flawless continents, all orbiting its placid, blue star. A fleet of hegemony patrol craft, their silver hulls immaculate, moved to escort them. Their commander's thoughts reached out through the chorus, clean and curious, expecting a report of a successful recalibration. The wave of confusion and horror that met them from Vrex's shattered fleet was like a psychic shockwave, disrupting the system's serene order. Vrex knew what was coming. He was the High Adjudicator. The failure was his. The blasphemy of what he had to report was his to bear alone. He stood before the Grand Synod, a council of 12 Glyconians so old their carapaces had faded to the color of ancient bone. They appeared as towering holograms in the sterile, white void of the adjudication chamber, their minds a single, monolithic entity of unshakable certainty. Vrex stood physically present on the chamber floor, alone, diminished figure. He delivered his report with the cold precision he had been trained for, detailing the warden's appearance, its impossible defenses, and the loss of 10 drone frigates and 1 carrier, the inevitable conclusion. He did not speak of fear or horror. He spoke only of the data, the irrefutable visual logs, the sensor readings that defied their science. When he finished, the chamber was silent. It was not the stunned silence of his bridge. It was the heavy, judgmental silence of a glacier preparing to move. Finally, Synod Prime Orin, the oldest of them all, his form less distinct than the others, spoke. His thought voice was like the grinding of tectonic plates. You lost 11 vessels. High Adjudicator, you engaged a single, unidentified craft of primitive design and lost 1/5 of your command. Explain this failure. It was not a failure of strategy, but Hinod Prime, Vrex stated, his claws locked behind his back to keep them from trembling. It was a failure of context. We were prepared for a battle. We were met with a cosmological event. Their technology does not operate on principles we recognize. It manipulates the fabric of space-time directly. They did not destroy my ships. They removed them from reality. A different Synod member, Kyle, scoffed, his thought voice sharp with contempt. Remove them from reality, Adjudicator. You speak in the language of mystics, not warriors. You encountered a novel energy weapon, a localized reality distortion projector perhaps, and your nerve failed you. You saw a simple trick of light and shadow and called it a ghost. You fled. Vrex held his ground. With respect, Synod Prime Kyle. A trick of light does not erase 1,000 Glaconian minds from the chorus. It does not age a warship to dust in a second. I have provided the raw data. It is unassailable. Data can be misinterpreted, Kyle countered, especially by a mind shaken by unexpected resistance. You have brought shame upon the hegemony. You have introduced the poison of retreat into a fleet that has never known it. You saw an anomaly and, rather than dissecting it with the cold logic of our truth, you panicked. Vrex turned his gaze back to Orin, the only one whose mind felt less like a closed door. Synod Prime Orin, consider their final message, the Prime sequence. It was not a threat. It was a demonstration. They were telling us, in the only universal language, that their understanding of the universe is fundamentally more complete than our own. They were not fighting us. They were teaching us a lesson. Orin's holographic form seemed to lean forward, the ancient eyes focusing on Vrex. And what is this lesson? Adjudicator, that we are not alone in our supremacy. Vrex said, the words tasting like heresy, that there is a power in this galaxy that has remained hidden, a power that views us not as an empire, but as children playing with fire near a powder magazine. They call themselves wardens. What are they guarding? What is this Veil Nebula they protect so fiercely? We assumed it was a resource. I believe we were wrong. I believe the nebula is a cage, and they are the jailers. We did not just provoke a fight. We rattled the bars of a prison. For the first time, a flicker of something other than disdain rippled through the Synod. Kale still radiated contempt, but from others, a seed of disquiet was planted. The concept was so utterly foreign that the Glaconians, the gardeners of the cosmos, could be perceived by another as a threat to be managed that it bordered on the unthinkable. Yet the data was there. The 11 missing ships were not a matter of interpretation. Your theory is imaginative, adjudicator, Orin said after a long pause, but it is based on fear and speculation. The hegemony does not make policy based on the nightmares of a disgraced commander. The integrity of our truth must be upheld. This warden is an anomaly that must be corrected, This technology, however novel, must be acquired, analyzed, and integrated. Vrex felt a cold dread solidify in his core. He knew what was coming next. "We will dispatch a purification fleet," Orin declared, his voice leaving no room for debate. 300 vessels, led by the Grand Adjudicator Taros himself. They will return to this Veil Nebula. They will pacify this warden. They will secure its technology. And they will demand an explanation for its aggression. The universe will be reminded that there is only one truth, and it is ours. "Synod Prime, you cannot," Vrex pleaded, taking a step forward, a breach of protocol that made the chamber guards tense. "You are sending them to their own erasure. You do not understand what is out there. 300 ships or 3,000, it will make no difference. You cannot fight a storm with a sword. You cannot defeat an enemy who can decide that the space you occupy no longer exists." "Enough!" Kael's voice thundered in the chamber. "Your cowardice is now bordering on sedition. You will be stripped of your command. You will be confined to your quarters for recalibration and psychological assessment. You are a broken tool, Vrex, and the hegemony has no use for broken tools." The connection to the Synod was severed. The towering holograms vanished, leaving Vrex alone in the vast, white emptiness of the chamber. The guards moved in, their ceremonial pikes held steady. He did not resist. As they escorted him away, his mind was not on his own fate. It was on the 300 ships of the Purification Fleet, on the hundreds of thousands of Glyconian souls who were about to be sent into the Veil Nebula. They were going to prune a weed, armed with the unshakable certainty of their own superiority. And Vrex, the only one who had seen the face of the forest's true gardener, could do nothing but watch them march toward their own silent, incomprehensible end. He was a prophet of an apocalypse that had already happened once, and was about to happen again on a scale that could shatter the hegemony forever. Vrex's confinement was not a cell of iron bars, but a chamber of absolute, sound-dampened white. It was a sensory deprivation womb designed for recalibration, a gentle term for the systematic dismantling of a deviant mind. Soft, ambient light pulsed in a rhythm meant to soothe and pacify, while subliminal frequencies hummed beneath the threshold of hearing, whispering the core tenets of the hegemony's truth order is paramount. Dissent is chaos. The individual is a flaw in the pattern. The goal was to erase the trauma of his encounter, to smooth over the jagged edges of his memory until the warden became a simple, explainable anomaly and his retreat a regrettable but logical error. Vrex resisted. He clung to the memory of the black sphere, the impossible non-existence of the inevitable conclusion. He replayed the prime number sequence in his mind, using its cold, perfect logic as an anchor against the warm, insidious tide of the recalibration chamber. The horror he had felt was now his most precious possession. It was the one thing that proved he was still sane in a world determined to make him forget a truth it could not accept. His only contact was with a robotic attendant that delivered nutrient paste and a series of psychological proctors who appeared as placid holograms, asking him the same circular questions day after day. But one cycle, the attendant that entered was different. It moved with a subtle hesitation, a minute imperfection that was utterly un-Glyconian. It placed the nutrient tray down, and as it turned to leave, it dropped a small, flat disc, no larger than Vrex's smallest ocular lens. It was a data slate, inert and featureless. The robot departed, and Vrex, his heart thrumming with a forbidden emotion hope retrieved it. He pressed his primary manipulator to its surface, and it activated, projecting a tiny, shimmering hologram of Sub-Adjudicator Lyra into the palm of his claw. Her face was etched with a strain he had never seen before. "Hi, Adjudicator." Her whispered voice was barely audible. "They are reassigning me to a logistical post on the Outer Rim. This is my last chance to speak with you. I have been debriefed by the Synod. I told them what they wanted to hear. But I reviewed the data from the Warden encounter. I ran every simulation. Vrex, you were right. It wasn't a weapon. It was a refutation of our existence." Vrex's claws tightened around the disk. "The Purification Fleet, Lyra, has it departed?" Lyra nodded, her image flickering. 2 days ago, Grand Adjudicator Taros is in command of the unassailable doctrine. 300 ships. They are broadcasting their mission across the entire hegemony network. They call it the Great Rectification. They are going to the Veil Nebula to prove that you were a coward and a fool. A cold fury burned in Vrex's chest, overriding the sedative effects of the chamber. "They are marching into oblivion," he said, his voice a low growl. "Taros is the most decorated adjudicator in the hegemony. He is the physical embodiment of our arrogance. He will not listen to reason. He will see the Warden. He will see its archaic design. He will throw the lives of 1,000,000 Glyconians away to prove a point." He looked at Lyra's desperate face. "My theory has evolved. Lyra, the nebula is a cage. The Warden is the jailer. But what are they jailing? I now believe the true danger is not the Warden, but its prisoner. Something so terrible that a being with the power to unmake reality has dedicated itself to containing it. And Taros, in his glorious ignorance, is about to take a sledgehammer to the lock on its cell door." Lyra's mandibles trembled. "What can we do? You are imprisoned. I am exiled. No one will listen." "You must," Vrex insisted, leaning closer to the tiny hologram. "You have the unedited sensor logs from our encounter, the raw data, before the Synod's analysts corrected it for public record. There is a deep channel frequency, an emergency override protocol known only to high adjudicators. It bypasses all hierarchies and transmits directly to the command ship of any active fleet. It is a failsafe against a Synod gone rogue, a relic of a more chaotic time we thought we had transcended. Send Taros the unedited logs. Send him my final report. And add this message. The jailer is not the threat. Do not provoke it. Do not engage. For the love of our truth, just watch and learn. It is all we can do." The hologram of Lyra nodded, a single grim gesture of assent, and then it vanished. Vrex was alone again in the white, silent room, but the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the thunderous countdown to a catastrophe he had set in motion, and one he was now desperately trying to stop. Meanwhile, hundreds of light years away, the Purification Fleet sliced through the void like a divine judgment. It was a breathtaking sight. 300 silver vessels, arranged in a perfect fractal spiral, with the colossal, kilometer-long form of the unassailable doctrine at its heart. On its bridge, Grand Adjudicator Taros stood like a statue cast from certainty. His carapace was dark and ancient, covered in the honorific scars of a dozen successful campaigns. He felt the pure, unwavering power of his fleet resonate through the chorus, a symphony of absolute confidence. He had reviewed Vrex's report and dismissed it with contempt. The fool had encountered a spatial anomaly, a technological quirk, and his mind, weakened by a latent philosophical flaw, had shattered. This Warden was a pest, an insect with a novel sting. Taros had brought a boot large enough to crush the entire nest. "We are approaching the Veil Nebula," his sub-adjudicator announced, his thought voice clean and sharp in the chorus. Deploying the truth scanners. Taros gave a curt gesture of approval. The truth scanners were the pinnacle of Glyconian technology, devices that pulsed waves of subspace energy capable of mapping an entire sector down to the quantum level. It was an act of supreme violation, a way of saying, nothing here is unknown to us. Nothing is sacred. As the fleet entered the nebula's outer wisps, the scanners fired. A wave of invisible, omniscient energy washed over the swirling clouds of gas and dust. For a moment, nothing happened. The nebula remained silent and placid. Then, a low-priority alert chimed on Taros's console. It was a direct, deep-channel message, flagged with the override protocol of a high adjudicator. Taros frowned. He recognized the encryption signature. It was from Lyra, Vrex's disgraced subordinate. He opened it with a flicker of irritation. The screen filled with Vrex's unedited logs, the raw, terrifying footage of ships being erased, and a short, frantic message. Taros read it, his mandibles tightening in disgust. The jailer is not the threat. Pathetic, superstitious nonsense. He thought into the chorus for all his commanders to hear. Vrex's madness is contagious. He seeks to excuse his cowardice by inventing phantoms. He was about to delete the message when the entire bridge of the unassailable doctrine shuddered. Alarms blared, not from a weapon impact, but from the truth scanners. They were overloading. "Report," Taros snapped. His sensor chief replied, his voice a stammer of disbelief. "Grand Adjudicator, the nebula, the scan, it wasn't empty. There's something in the gas. Not a ship. The gas itself. It's structured like a neural network. We didn't scan a nebula. We just poked the cerebral cortex of a living being the size of a solar system." Before Taros could process this, the Warden appeared. It emerged from the heart of the nebula, the same small, scarred, unassuming vessel. It floated before his massive fleet, a David before a fleet of Goliaths, but it did not attack. Instead, the very fabric of the nebula began to change. The turquoise and magenta clouds swirled, not into random vortexes, but into coherent, impossible shapes. Glyconian history began to play out in shimmering curtains of ionized gas 100 kilometers high, their evolution from swamp creatures, their first forays into space, their conquest of their home system. It was all there, rendered in perfect mocking detail. The Warden had not just scanned them, it had read them, learned them, and was now holding their entire history up to them like a mirror. Then, the Warden spoke, not through radio waves, but directly into the synaptic ocean of the chorus. It was not a voice, it was a torrent of pure, raw data, a psychic payload of absolute knowledge. It bypassed the rational minds of the Glyconians and injected a concept directly into their souls. They were shown the prisoner. It was not a creature of flesh or energy. It was a chaotic idea, a sentient paradox that existed before the Big Bang, which the Wardens had fought and trapped within the physical laws of this universe at the dawn of time. The nebula was its prison, and the stars were its bars. The Glyconians saw what would happen if it were ever released, stars winking out of existence, galaxies unraveling like spoiled tapestries, the very concept of cause and effect dissolving into a meaningless scream. It was a truth so vast and so horrifying that the rigid, orderly minds of the Glyconian commanders could not withstand it. The chorus shattered. Where there had been a symphony of confidence, there was now a cacophony of 1,000,000 minds screaming in unison. On the bridge of the unassailable doctrine, Terrace watched his sub-adjudicator claw at his own multifaceted eyes, driven mad by the sheer cosmic insignificance the Warden had revealed. Across the fleet, ships began to falter. Some fired their weapons at phantoms, striking their sister ships. Others simply went dark, their crews catatonic. The perfect, fractal spiral of the fleet dissolved into a panicked, disorganized mob. Grand Adjudicator Taro stood frozen, his mind a fortress of discipline holding back an ocean of madness. He had seen the truth. Vrex was not a coward. He was a prophet. And Taros, in his hubris, had led his people to the altar of a god they could not comprehend, and he had offered them as a sacrifice. As his fleet tore itself apart around him, the Warden finally moved. It extended a single hair-thin beam of blackness and neatly erased the command bridges of a dozen capital ships, a final, contemptuous demonstration of its power. Taros, his certainty shattered, his soul scoured, screamed the one word he had sworn he would never utter: retreat. As the remnants of the Purification Fleet tore open space-time to flee, a final message was imprinted on the mind of every survivor. It was not a sequence of numbers this time. It was a single and perfect, real-time image, the crystalline jewel of Glycon Prime, their beloved homeworld, and slowly, a shadow began to fall across it, the shadow of a single, small, scarred human ship. A Warden taking up a new, silent vigil. The message was unmistakable. We know who you are. We know where you live. And now you know what you almost set free. Do not return. The hegemony did not break. It fractured. The remnants of the Purification Fleet, less than 200 of the original 300 ships, limped back to Glycon Prime not as a disciplined military force, but as a caravan of traumatized refugees. The crews were shattered things, their minds scarred by the truth the Warden had injected into the chorus. Many were left catatonic, their synaptic pathways burned out by a concept too vast for their orderly minds to contain. Others were driven to a quiet, obsessive madness, endlessly scratching prime number sequences onto the bulkheads of their ships. Grand Adjudicator Taros was among the latter. He was found on the bridge of the unassailable doctrine, his honorific scars a stark contrast to the vacant, terrified stare in his multifaceted eyes, silently arranging and rearranging the holographic tactical display into the spiral shape of the Veil Nebula. He was a living monument to the hegemony's broken pride. The Grand Synod tried to contain the fallout. They declared the Purification Fleet the victim of a novel psychic weapon, a mimetic contagion that had caused mass psychosis. They suppressed the logs, quarantined the crews, and began a hegemony-wide campaign of recalibration, attempting to scrub the collective consciousness of the terrifying truth. But it was too late. The story of the Warden, the living nebula, and the unnameable prisoner it contained leaked out. It spread not as a factual report, but as a whispered heresy, a ghost story told in the darkened corridors of starships and the cloistered academies of Glycon Prime. The unshakable certainty that had been the bedrock of their civilization for millennia began to crumble, replaced by a gnawing, cosmic dread. The universe was no longer a garden to be tended. It was a dark forest filled with things far older and more powerful than they had ever imagined. The image of the Warden's shadow falling across their homeworld became a cultural icon of fear, the ultimate boogeyman in a society that had forgotten what fear felt like. Rex was released from his white room. He was not exonerated. He was simply no longer relevant in the face of a larger crisis. The Synod, now a fractured and paranoid body, brought him before them once more. The chamber was the same, but the atmosphere was funereal. Synod Prime Orin's hologram seemed dimmer, more faded than before. Adjudicator Vrex. His thought voice was heavy, weary. You have been vindicated. Your heresy has become our reality. The hegemony is in a state of quiet panic. Our fleets are paralyzed. Our commanders question their orders. Our truth has been proven to be a lie of omission. We are children who have just learned of monsters. Vrex stood before them, not with triumph, but with a profound sadness. The monsters were always there. Synod Prime. We were simply too arrogant to look for them. Kale, the contemptuous Synod member, was not present. Vrex learned later that he had taken his own life, unable to reconcile the Warden's truth with his own rigid worldview. He had chosen non-existence over a reality he could not dominate. The Warden, Orin continued, it has not left. For months, it has maintained a stationary orbit just outside our system's heliopause. It is a silent, unblinking sentinel. It does not respond to our hails. It does not move. It simply watches. A constant, terrifying reminder of our inferiority. What does it want? Vrex, you are the only one who has faced it and retained his sanity. What is its purpose? Vrex took a moment, gathering his thoughts. The recalibration chamber had failed to erase his memories, but it had sharpened them, crystallizing them into a terrifying clarity. It wants nothing from us, he said finally. That is the truth you still fail to grasp. We are beneath its notice. It is not watching us as a predator watches its prey. It is watching us as a biologist watches a volatile microbe in a petri dish. Our purification fleet was the equivalent of the microbe suddenly attempting to breach its containment. The Warden sterilized the breach, and now it is observing, ensuring the contamination does not spread. The Synod chamber was silent. The analogy was brutal, humiliating, and undeniably true. It is not a threat, Vrex continued. It is a consequence. We have revealed ourselves to be a galactic adolescent, powerful enough to be dangerous, but too ignorant to be wise. The Warden has put us in a cosmic time out, waiting to see if we mature or if we simply destroy ourselves in our panic and confusion. Maturity, another Synod member scoffed weakly. What does that even mean in this context? It means we must change, Vrex replied, his voice ringing with a conviction that startled even himself. Our entire philosophy is built on the premise that we are the apex, the final answer. We must now accept that we are just one answer among many, and perhaps not even the most important one. We must stop trying to impose our truth on the universe and instead start listening to the truths the universe is trying to teach us. We must replace our arrogance with curiosity and our certainty with humility. It was the most profound heresy he could have uttered, a direct assault on the very foundations of the hegemony. But this time, no one called for his recalibration. They listened, their ancient minds grappling with a paradigm shift so immense it threatened to tear their civilization apart. It was Orin who finally spoke. What you propose is the end of the Glycon hegemony as we have known it for 1,000,000 years. Vrex met his gaze. No, Synod Prime. What I propose is the only way for the Glycon hegemony to have a future. A new mandate was issued by the Grand Synod, one that sent shockwaves through their stagnant society. The fleets were recalled, not for conquest, but for exploration. Scientific divisions that had been dormant for eons were revitalized. Their new purpose not to validate the existing truth, but to seek out new, even contradictory truths. Vrex, the disgraced commander, was reinstated and given a new title, High Inquisitor. His mission was not to enforce dogma, but to question it. He was put in command of a single and unarmed exploration vessel, the Quiet Inquiry. His crew was not composed of warriors, but of the hegemony's most brilliant and open-minded scientists, philosophers, mathematicians, and Lyra, his former sub-adjudicator, whom he had personally requested as his first officer. Their mission was not to return to the Veil Nebula. That was forbidden territory, a sacred ground they were not yet worthy to tread. Their mission was to travel in the opposite direction, into the uncharted voids where the hegemony had never bothered to look, and to find others, not to conquer or convert them, but to learn from them, to find other species who might have encountered the Wardens, or worse, to assemble a galactic codex of knowledge, to piece together the puzzle of a universe they had so arrogantly assumed they already understood. As the Quiet Inquiry prepared for its departure, Vrex stood on the bridge, looking out at the starfield. The ship was small, its systems dedicated to sensors and communication, not weapons. It felt right. For the first time, and he was not a gardener with a sickle, but a student with a book. His gaze drifted to the edge of the system, where the sensor return showed a single, faint, unmoving contact, the Warden. It was still there, watching. It was both their jailer and their silent, inscrutable teacher. "Are you ready, Inquisitor?" Lyra asked, her voice calm, but with an undercurrent of excitement he had never heard before. "Ready for what?" "First officer," he asked, a rhetorical question. She smiled, a gesture he was only just learning to interpret. "To be wrong," she said. "To be gloriously fundamentally and repeatedly wrong about everything we thought we knew." Vrex turned from the view screen and looked at his new crew, a collection of curious, frightened, and hopeful minds, all embarked on the most terrifying and necessary journey in their history. "Yes, Lyra," he said, and for the first time in his long life, his thought voice in the chorus was not a statement of command, but a whisper of pure, unadulterated wonder. "I believe I am." The Quiet Inquiry engaged its warp drive, not with the aggressive roar of a warship, but with the quiet hum of a vessel leaving home to find its true place in a universe that had just become infinitely larger and more mysterious. The void of uncharted space was not empty, it was simply quiet. For years, the Quiet Inquiry moved through this immense silence, and its crew learned to listen. They were no longer gardeners seeking to impose order, but archaeologists sifting through the dust of eons for a single, precious shard of meaning. The chorus, once a tool of command and control, had transformed. It was now a shared space of scientific inquiry, a silent, synaptic colloquium where 1,000 different theories bloomed and faded with every new stellar phenomenon they encountered. Vrex, the High Inquisitor, had changed most of all. The rigid certainty that had once defined his exoskeleton had been replaced by a patient, watchful stillness. He spent his cycles not on the command dais, but before the long-range sensor arrays, basically observing the faint, ancient light of distant galaxies, feeling for the first time the true, soul-crushing scale of the cosmos. He was not looking for enemies to defeat or primitives to enlighten. He was looking for echoes, for patterns, for the faint, cosmic footprints of anyone else who had survived looking into the abyss and had not been consumed. Lyra had become the heart of this new philosophy. She managed the flow of data, not as a tactical officer, but as a curator. For millennia, she once broadcast to the entire crew through the chorus. We sought to be the galaxy's loudest voice. Now, we must learn to be its most attentive ear. They found ruins, the silent, radioactive tombs of civilizations that had risen and fallen without the hegemony ever knowing they existed. They found cosmic marvels that defied their old physics, forcing them to rewrite their most fundamental understanding of reality on a near-daily basis. With each discovery, their old arrogance was ground away, replaced by a profound and humbling awe. They were not failures. They were students in the grandest university imaginable, and their tuition had been the near death of their entire civilization. It was on their 5th year of travel that they found it. Not a fleet, not an empire, but a signal unlike any they had ever encountered. It was not a broadcast of language or data, but a complex berceau, harmonious resonance, a song being sung on the strings of space-time itself. Following it, they arrived in a system bathed in the soft, white light of a dying star. There, they saw the source of a flotilla of ships that seemed woven from captured light and solidified gas, their forms fluid and organic, moving together not in a military formation, but in a slow, graceful dance, like a school of bioluminescent fish in a dark ocean. Vrex felt a tremor of his old self, the instinct to classify, to assess threat levels, but he pushed it down. This was a test, the first true test of their new purpose. He gave the order, and the quiet inquiry sent its first message to an alien intelligence in centuries. It was not the anthem of benevolence. It was not a declaration of their truth. It was a simple, honest query, translated into the universal language of mathematics and basic physics. It said, "We are the Glycon. We were lost, and now we seek to understand. We are listening." For a long, tense moment, there was only the space-time song of the alien vessels. Then, one of the light ships detached from the dance and drifted toward them. A new voice entered the chorus, not injected with force like the Warden's, but ever gently, like an outstretched hand. It was a mind voice that felt impossibly ancient, layered with the memories of 1,000 millennia, and tinged with a great, abiding sadness. "We hear you, lost ones. We are the Cygnian weavers, and we, too, were once lost. We, too, knocked on a door that was never meant to be opened." The dialogue that followed was not a negotiation or an exchange of threats. It was a sharing of scars. The weavers, in their shimmering, ethereal forms, invited Vrex, Lyra, and a small delegation aboard their vessel, which was less a machine and more a living library. Its corridors were woven from memory. Its walls pulsed with the recorded histories of 10,000 extinct species. The weavers explained that they had once been an empire much like the hegemony, a proud race of builders who sought to reshape the cosmos to their will. In their hubris, they had attempted to harness the energy of a caged nebula, seeking to unlock a power source of infinite potential. They had met a warden, but their warden, a being of pure sound, had not been silent. It had sung them a song of choice. They could be erased for their transgression, or they could take up a new purpose. They could become weavers, nomadic archivists dedicated to preserving the memories of the galaxy against the coming silence. They chose to live. From them, Vrex learned the staggering truth. Humanity was just one of many races who had, over the eons, accepted the burden of being a warden. They were not a unified empire, but a loose, philosophical fellowship of survivors who had reached a certain level of technological and moral maturity. Their task was to act as the galaxy's immune system. The prisoners, the weavers explained, were not physical beings. They were extra-cosmic concepts, sentient paradoxes and laws of impossible physics that had bled through into this reality during its chaotic birth. If released, they would not conquer, they would overwrite. They would unravel the very logic of existence. The Veil Nebula was just one of many such prisons, called cradles by the Weavers, scattered across the cosmos. The Glycon hegemony had not been a threat worthy of a war. They had been a localized, self-important infection, and the human warden had treated them with the cosmic equivalent of a single, precisely targeted antibiotic and a stern warning to stay in their own petri dish. The entirety of Glyconian history, a million years of conquest and self-aggrandizement, was reduced in that moment to a footnote in a story so vast it was almost incomprehensible. Rex felt the last vestiges of his old self crumble to dust, and in its place, a strange, liberating peace settled. They were not the gardeners. They were not even the weeds. They were just one of countless seeds, scattered in a forest filled with ancient trees and sleeping dragons. He looked at Lyra, and in her multifaceted eyes, he saw not the reflection of a warrior or a commander, but of a scholar who had just been handed the first page of a book with an infinite number of pages. They spent weeks with the Weavers, sharing knowledge, trading histories, and weaving the story of the Glycon into the living library of the lightships. When it was time to leave, Vrex knew what he had to do. He sent a single and deep channel transmission back to Glycon Prime. It contained everything: the story of the Weavers, the truth about the Wardens and the Cradles, and the new, humbling map of their place in the universe. He ended the message not with an order, but with a plea. Our truth was a map of a single room. It is time to accept that we live in a mansion of infinite chambers. Let us not be its conquerors. Let us be its students. As the quiet inquiry turned to leave the dying star and venture once more into the quiet dark, Vrex stood on the bridge, looking out at the endless sea of stars. His gaze drifted in the general direction of his home system. So far away now, it was just another anonymous point of light. He thought of the Warden, still there, still watching. The silence from that lone human ship no longer felt like a threat. It was not the silence of a jailer watching a prisoner. It was the quiet, patient silence of a teacher who, having posed a profound question, was waiting for the student to finally begin to understand the answer. The real journey of the Glycon hegemony was not over. It had just begun.